I grew up rough in the mean streets of Brooklyn and may have been the least likely to get into spirituality.
Okay, these streets aren't mean. It's Brooklyn Heights. I went to this Catholic school, my formative years in elementary school, getting into trouble in this courtyard, getting into fights, a few steps away from the church.
Despite my Catholic religious upbringing, I gravitated more toward religions of the East, starting with Zen Buddhism. It stemmed from my interest in martial arts. I started with Japanese karate and then Chinese kung fu. I also studied Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune Do and mixed martial arts.
But I could have gotten into all of that without any spiritual practice. Why turn to spirituality?
First, I'll define spirituality as a living practice of the felt understanding of a reality underlying the apparent physical world. So the obvious answer of why turn to spirituality is when the physical world doesn't cut it. We turn to spiritual practices when we become disillusioned with our struggle in the physical world to find happiness. Oftentimes, many of us have to go through a certain amount of adversity, suffering, or traumatic experiences. We finally come to realize that worldly pursuits can't bring us any deep, lasting happiness. Growing up in my family, I was always the weird one. I was criticized for being a loner and strange compared to my brothers. I didn't quite fit in. I was an outcast.
And if I was going to be different, I wanted to be special. I started martial art practice at a young age, starting with karate. I found a karate studio on this street, signed myself up, and walked a class on my own.
I was first inspired by the Karate Kid movies, and those movies were probably my first exposure to the mysticism of the East. I started reading books like Zen and the Martial Arts and Kodo, Ancient Ways. And then I went more esoteric with the Tao of Meditation and the Tao Te Ching, and then reading actual works of Japanese and Chinese Zen, and learning internal Kung Fu like Taiji and Qigong. I figured I might be able to use those ancient teachings to become superhuman, to gain some sort of spiritual, psychic power, or at least develop some extraordinary skill or mental abilities. Instead, I became a good fighter, and at least developed focus and self-discipline. I went from being a troublemaker in school to a straight-A student. And as I learned how to fight, ironically, I wound up fighting less on the street.
Stemming from my martial art practice, I had an affinity for Eastern spiritual traditions. I even trained at the Shaolin Temple in China. I started studying Chan Buddhism, known as Zen in Japanese, and recently I've been getting into Advaita Vedanta of the Indian tradition. And I'm going to get into these more in the vlog.
Advaita Vedanta promises a direct path to freedom from suffering, as many other spiritual and religious traditions teach their own approach to this type of ultimate liberation or salvation, all of which I want to explore in this vlog. But none of them involve seeking out the next object, accomplishment, experience, or relationship that may temporarily gratify us and then lead to further disappointment and seeking. Spirituality seems to be the only recourse when fed up or beaten down by life conditions. It may take a while for life situations to take their toll on us, but it may eventually happen for most people. That may be why wisdom is supposed to come with old age. Eventually, when we turn to spirituality, we realize that there must be a better way to live more unconditionally, to not be at the mercy of changing life circumstances and having to constantly seek or avoid experiences to make us happy. There must be a way to be happy regardless of current life conditions. We may come to realize that the part of ourselves that's holding on to those life conditions, fussing about them, complaining about them, telling stories about them, basically keeping them active and alive, is our ego consciousness, the inner voice that's incessantly chatting and creating the narrative of our lives. So to transcend our difficult life conditions is to transcend our ego consciousness, to become less egotistical, less identified with our individual selves, and more spiritual. But what does that mean, and how do we get there? Is it about giving up our worldly possessions and living a life exclusively to attain enlightenment? That's of course one route some people take in living a monastic life. But more practically for most of society, does it mean at least giving up most of our worldly possessions and becoming a minimalist? Could be, but that may not be compelling to a lot of us either. I believe that even if we don't physically renounce the world as an ascetic or monk, we can still mentally renounce the world.
But it's a bit of a dichotomy for me since I believe in the law of attraction. On one hand, I'm materialistic and I train myself to think positively because I know that a positive mindset can lead to positive outcomes. And on the other hand, I realize that the happy moments that come with those positive outcomes are fleeting, temporary, and limited, and that a deeper, lasting peace and happiness can only be had on a more spiritual path in the realization of our true nature.
I believe most of us can live very spiritual and fulfilling lives within the same very worldly and active lifestyles we're used to. The physical and the spiritual aren't mutually exclusive. But there is one thing that gets in the way of spirituality and ultimate happiness, and it's not physical, it's mental. It's our ego consciousness. It's identifying exclusively with our personal and limited selves.
I'm flying back home tonight. It was a good trip back to my hometown. It brought back vivid memories of my past to even further reinforce my sense of an ego self. Like this video if it resonated with you, and if you want to see more, then subscribe below to follow me on my journey. See you in the next one.